I had sat at that table hundreds of times, right where Eleanor, my wife, sat every morning, the spot where she placed her coffee mug, took notes for work, and made calls to clients. After 30 years of marriage, I truly believed there wasn't a single corner of that room outside my field of vision, and yet directly behind the place she sat. Most often, the renovation contractor discovered a shelf installed in a very different way. It wasn't fixed. It had sliding rails, and behind it was a hollow space sealed so thoroughly that I had never known it existed. And inside was an electronic safe not listed in any family paperwork, never mentioned, not even to me, the man who had shared her bed for 3 decades. Why would the woman I trusted absolutely hide a secret in a place I looked at every single day? Because if what was inside were harmless, she would never have needed to conceal it so completely. If you're listening to this story, leave a period and tell me where you're listening from. Subscribe to the channel to give me the motivation to reveal every secret my wife hid for so many decades. Thank you for being here. I was sitting inside Ashford Glen Church when my phone vibrated once short and deliberate enough for me to know it wasn't a wrong number, and I was about to ignore it because people here don't appreciate ringing phones. But when I saw the name on the screen, my hand froze. Tom Rourke, not the kind of man who calls just to chat. A home renovation contractor who'd known my family for years. Always direct, efficient, finished the job, and left. And if Tom was calling on a Sunday morning, there was a reason. I stood up and stepped out through the side door, the air outside colder than inside the church. Wind passing through the maple trees, carrying the smell of dry leaves. Walter Tom said the moment I answered his voice, low and unlike his usual tone, "Sorry to call you at a time like this." "What's going on?" I asked. Tom was silent for a few seconds, and I clearly heard him exhale. "We're removing the section of wall behind the bookshelf in Mrs. Eleanor's office, and I think you need to come here." "Is there a problem with the work?" I asked. "Not that kind. I don't think this is just about renovations." And that sentence sent a chill straight down my spine. "What did you find?" I pressed. "I don't want to say it over the phone," Tom replied, "but there's something hidden extremely well. Not hidden for appearance. Hidden so no one would ever find it." I leaned back against the stone wall of the church, Eleanor's image flashing in my mind, always careful, always planning one step, never doing anything without reason. "I'll come alone." "No," Tom cut in, his voice firm. "I wouldn't advise that." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What do you mean? I've been doing this work for over 20 years, Tom said slowly. "When someone hides something this carefully, it's usually to keep it from people inside the house, not outsiders." I swallowed hard. "I think you shouldn't face this alone," he continued. "If possible, bring both of your sons." That sentence felt like a heavy shove to my chest. Nathan. Elliot. The 2 names I had tried not to think about all morning. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Absolutely," Tom answered. "I'm saying this for your safety and because of what may happen after you see what's there." The call ended. I stood still for a moment, staring at the churchyard ahead of me, the service inside continuing, everyone sitting quietly as if nothing at all were waiting outside for them. I grabbed my coat and left. Without looking back on the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio, only the steady sound of the engine, and in my mind I began piecing together scattered fragments. The room Eleanor always kept, locked the bookshelf. No one was ever allowed to touch. The way she hesitated whenever I asked about her work. I hadn't called Nathan yet, or Elliot, but one thing I understood with absolute clarity. Tom was not a man who said things like that without a reason. The room sat behind the house, separated from the kitchen by a narrow passageway. I used to call it the office. After Eleanor died, I only called it the back. I passed it every day but rarely stopped. The white-painted wooden door was always closed, the handle cold and so familiar that just looking at it made my heart hesitate. Eleanor worked there for 25 years. The room was not large, just over 10 square meters, but so orderly that anyone who stepped inside immediately understood this was a place where every signature was preceded by careful thought. The desk was placed against the east-facing window, morning sunlight falling directly across its surface. To the left stood a low filing cabinet. To the right, a custom-built bookshelf reaching the ceiling. Eleanor disliked excess. Everything in the room had a fixed position, and if something shifted even slightly, she noticed at once. Eleanor's work was not loud. She did not litigate, did not appear in newspapers. She handled estate and retirement planning for older people, those who wanted to preserve a bit of order when life began to unravel. Wills, trusts, asset distribution, retirement plans, protecting savings from inflation, and from the impulsive decisions of children and grandchildren. She often said to me, "Old people don't need miracles. They just need to be sure that what they saved their whole lives won't disappear because of one wrong signature." Eleanor's clients were not glamorous. They were retired teachers, former factory workers, widows living alone, people who still kept old passbooks in their drawers. They came with worn folders and unspoken worries. Eleanor listened, asked slowly, and took careful notes. I used to sit in the living room and hear her explaining things over the phone, her voice calm and clear, making no fanciful promises. She did not sell hope. She sold peace of mind. After the funeral, I avoided that room for nearly 1 year. Not because of dust or clutter. I was afraid of the feeling that everything was still exactly where it had been, as if Eleanor had only stepped out to buy coffee. The white ceramic mug by the window has a small crack in the handle. The neat stack of yellow sticky notes is beside the printer. The faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air. I was afraid that if I went in, I would forget she was gone. But time does not stand still. Mila Elliott's daughter, my granddaughter, grew faster than I could adjust. She began to need a quiet place to study. The dining table no longer worked. The living room was always filled with television noise. I knew I could not keep that room as a shrine forever. I told myself Eleanor would understand. She had always been practical. The initial renovation plan was simple. Remove some shelves, repaint the walls, replace the lights with something brighter and add more outlets. I wanted to keep the old desk not out of sentimentality, but because it was solid, spacious, and suitable for a child to study at. I called Tom because he knew the house, understood its structure, and was not overly curious. I did not want anyone poking through what Eleanor had left behind. While Tom worked, I stayed out. I did not watch. I was afraid of seeing each object lifted, afraid of hearing wood scrape against walls, afraid of the moment my heart might drop. I thought it would pass like any other home repair. One morning a to-do list, and then it would be over. But there was one thing I had never considered. Eleanor never left important documents exposed. Any client files she brought home were finished the same day. If something had to be kept, it was locked away carefully. I knew this because throughout our marriage, she always reminded me not to touch the filing cabinet unless necessary, not because of secrecy, but because of professional responsibility. That was why when Tom said he was dismantling the Eastern bookshelf, the one Eleanor had custom ordered in 2003, I felt a faint unease. That shelf was not just furniture. It covered an entire section of wall from floor to ceiling. Eleanor had once told the carpenter she wanted one seamless surface, no gaps. At the time, I paid no attention. Now thinking back, that sentence returned with startling clarity. I wanted to renovate the room to create a new beginning for Mila. But deeper than that, I was also trying to close a chapter of my own life. I did not expect that touching the space where Eleanor had sat every day would open another door, not one of memory, but of things she had never had the chance to say. In my mind, at that moment, Eleanor was still just a careful woman who worked for others and then died of illness. I had never imagined that this room held anything beyond professional routine. I certainly never thought that a renovation decision so ordinary would place me face to face with files I should never have wanted to see. And I did not know that that very morning when Tom pulled the bookshelf from its familiar position, a part of the truth had begun to surface silently without a sound. Exactly the way Eleanor had worked for 25 years, quietly, precisely, and without giving anyone time to prepare for the consequences. I went back into the room at noon when the sun was directly overhead, and the window's shadow fell straight across the floor. Tom was standing in front of the eastern bookshelf, his t-shirt dusted with wood shavings, both hands on his hips like a man facing a problem he didn't like already having an answer. He looked up when he saw me, his eyes no longer carrying their usual casual ease. "Take a look at this," Tom said, lowering his voice. "This shelf isn't like the others." I stepped closer. From the outside, everything looked familiar. Thick wooden tiers, sharp edges, and an evenly applied coat of paint. But when Tom pushed lightly, the entire shelf slid forward a short distance, just enough to reveal a narrow seam behind it. The movement was so smooth it sent a chill through me. No creaking, no shaking, as if it had been born to move that way. "Load-bearing rails," Tom explained, crouching to point at the base. "The kind used for industrial cabinets. Not something you build for a living room. To install this, you have to calculate the weight and measure very precisely." I swallowed. Eleanor disliked showiness. She didn't spend money on unnecessary things. So why would a bookshelf in a small office need a rail system like that? Tom continued removing the outer wooden trim, working slowly, deliberately, like someone who knew he was entering a zone that demanded caution. When the third trim piece came off, he stopped and turned to me. "The latch is here," he said, pointing to a spot that was almost impossible to notice. "Hidden behind, pressed tight to the frame. If you don't know the removal order, no one would ever find it." I followed his hand. It was just a small metal piece, the same color as the wood, offset by a few millimeters. There was no reason anyone would notice it unless they were actively searching. My heart began to beat faster. Eleanor had always hated anything obvious. If she hid something, she would do it in a way that made people dismiss it at first glance. "You have to remove things in the right order for it to open," Tom continued. "If you just pull at it, the shelf locks solid." I almost did that. "What's inside?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. "An empty compartment," he replied, "at least from what I can see here." He released the latch, then pushed the shelf forward a bit more. Behind it was a long, hollow space, running along the wall, about shoulder height, for an adult, and roughly a foot deep. No light, no wiring, just a straight, dark void. The smell of old wood mixed with cold metal rushed out completely, unlike the familiar scent of paper and ink in the room. I stood still, one hand resting on the edge of the desk. In my mind, I saw Eleanor, sitting here in the evenings, the desk lamp on the window slightly open. I had always thought she worked late because of her responsibility to clients. Now I understood that there were times she needed absolute privacy, not to think, but to hide. Tom took a flashlight from his toolbox and shone it into the compartment. The beam swept across smooth inner surfaces, no nail marks, no scratches. "This was built after the wall went up," he said. "Not a temporary modification. Someone planned this from the start." I heard every word clearly, yet it felt as though they passed through my ears, without fully reaching my awareness. Eleanor had hidden this intentionally, not because she feared thieves, not because of a professional habit. She had prepared for a situation in which I, her husband, was not meant to know. "Do you want me to keep taking it apart?" Tom asked. I shook my head. "Give me a few minutes." He nodded and stepped back, leaving me alone in front of that dark space. I reached out and touched the inner wall. Cold, solid, real. Not a memory, not an illusion. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my breathing steady. What I felt then wasn't curiosity, and it wasn't exactly fear. It was like realizing that someone close to you had lived another part of their life inside the same house, and that part was not meant for you. I turned to Tom. "You called me here because of this." He met my eyes, no evasions. I've seen a lot of hiding places, safes behind paintings, floor compartments, under rugs, secret drawers in kitchen cabinets. But this is different. It was made so no one would ever find it. And if someone did, they'd need to be ready. His words sent a chill down my spine. Tom wasn't the type to exaggerate. He was used to encountering things people wanted concealed, but he rarely commented. This time he had broken that habit. Eleanor didn't do things randomly, I said as much to reassure myself as anything else. If she did this, there was a reason. Tom nodded. That's what I think, and that's why I called you. I shouldn't open it any further on my own, I understood. Not because of physical danger, the structure was sound, but because whatever lay beyond could change the way I saw everything. I looked at the empty compartment again. In that darkness, I saw a chain of unanswered questions. What kind of work had Eleanor been doing that required this space? What files couldn't be kept in an ordinary safe? And most importantly, who had she intended to find it? I thought of Mila. I thought of turning this room into a study space filled with light and the steady sound of turning pages. That thought now felt like a luxury. Some things couldn't be renovated in any simple sense. Some spaces retained the responsibility of the person who created them, and that responsibility was slowly passing into my hands. We stop here, I said. Don't take it any further apart. Leave it as it is. Tom packed up his tools, but his eyes kept flicking back to the bookshelf as if it might move on its own. Before leaving the room, he paused at the door. If you need me to stay, I can. I'll call, I replied. When he was gone, the room fell silent again. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wall clock tick. The bookshelf was no longer in its familiar place, exposing a space that was never meant for light. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer standing outside the story Eleanor had left behind. She had built a structure intricate enough to outlast time, and I had just accidentally released the first correct latch. This room was no longer her old office. It had become the starting point of a chain of truths I wasn't ready for but could no longer turn away from. And when I gently slid the bookshelf back into place, covering the dark compartment, I understood that hiding it no longer mattered. The only question was when I would open it again, and who would need to be there when that happened. I went back into the room that evening when the house had finally gone quiet. Mila was sleeping soundly, the hallway light casting a pale yellow glow across the floor. I closed the door behind me, locked it out of habit, then stood in front of the bookshelf as if facing someone familiar who had just revealed another side. The empty cavity behind it was still concealed, but the sense of its presence was impossible to shake. I pulled the shelf out a little farther, just enough to slip inside. At the back of the compartment, a block of metal emerged in the beam of my flashlight. An electronic safe bolted firmly into the wall with thick bolts. The surface was lightly scratched, not new but carefully wiped clean. The small screen above the keypad was dark, as if waiting for someone it already knew. I stood there for a long time. Eleanor and I had lived together for more than 30 years. We shared everything from electricity bills to retirement plans. I knew she had a safe deposit box at the bank, and I knew how careful she was with documents. But this safe placed right inside the house had never been mentioned. Not because I never asked, but because she had never created a situation that made me curious. What I felt then was not exactly anger. It was more like a small abrasion, dull and persistent, making me realize there was a part of my marriage I had never touched. I did not want to destroy everything by guessing. Eleanor hated haste. If she had left this for me, there would be instructions. I pulled out a thin folder from the desk. Old papers I had not finished sorting since the first day of renovation. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at a folded note clipped between two contract copies. The familiar handwriting appeared. The blue ink faded. Never try more than 3 times. When you rush, remember what is most familiar. I let out a slow breath. It was something Eleanor used to say whenever I snapped, because I forgot an email password. She would smile, put a hand on my shoulder, and repeat it exactly like that. No numbers, no dates. Just a reminder about her own habits. The safe had a lockout mode, Tom had mentioned it. Enter the wrong code too many times, and it would freeze for hours. I sat down in the chair and let my thoughts settle. What was most familiar to Eleanor? Not birthdays, not anniversaries. She always avoided predictable things. She believed security was not in complexity, but in consistency with personal logic. I remembered another line she often told clients. If you need to lock a secret, choose something that happens every morning before the world wakes up. I looked around the room, the desk, the east-facing window, the morning light. Eleanor always started her day at 6:15 in the morning, no earlier, no later. I entered 615, slowly pausing a beat between each press. The screen lit up. A soft click sounded inside the narrow space. The safe door opened without resistance. Inside was neat to the point of being chilling. No jewelry, no cash. Just 3 items placed carefully: a black USB drive, a sealed envelope, and a thin stack of papers. I took each one out and placed them on the desk, like arranging evidence. Though at that moment I did not yet know what I was preparing for. The envelope had my name on it, Eleanor's handwriting, straight, unadorned. The seal was intact, with no sign of having been opened. I did not rush to tear it open. Instead, I picked up the stack of papers. On the cover, client statements. In the top right corner were small red marks, neat, evenly spaced like deliberate highlights. I turned the first page. Each sheet was a ledger, dates, account numbers, money in and out. The client names were familiar people I had seen in our living room, people I had heard Eleanor address in a warm personal voice. The red marks were not on large figures. They were on patterns, repeated transfers, the same timing, the same intermediary. Not something an outsider would easily notice. But I had lived with Eleanor long enough to know that when she marked something, she had already seen a deviation from order. I plugged the USB into my laptop. A folder appeared, simply named. Inside were scanned documents, emails, and reconciliation tables. I skimmed only a few, then closed them. Instinct told me that if I read everything right, then there would be no way back. I needed to know why Eleanor had hidden these things, not just what she had hidden. I returned to the envelope. The paper made a soft sound as I opened it. Inside were a few handwritten pages. Not long, but heavy. Eleanor did not circle her point. She wrote that some files should not be kept in a bank safe, because they involved living people, not just assets. She wrote that there had been times she thought she was mistaken, that she checked again and again, that she sought independent sources. And when she was certain, she decided to keep everything in a place only one person could find, the person close enough to understand how she thought, yet far enough not to be swept up in professional emotion. The final lines were brief. If you are reading this, it means I did not have time to tell you. Do not guess. Do not rush. Read in the order I left. I folded the letter. The faint sense of betrayal from earlier shifted into something more complex. Eleanor had not hidden this because she did not trust me. She hid it because she understood that some truths, if spoken too early, would be distorted by the reflex to protect family. She chose to let time smooth the emotions so that when I opened the safe, I would be clear-headed enough to look straight at it. I put everything back in order, leaving only the USB and the envelope on the desk. The safe was closed, the code cleared. I pushed the bookshelf back into place, the hidden latch clicking smoothly as if it had never been disturbed. The room returned to its familiar shape, but I knew the structure beneath it had changed. Before leaving, I stood there a while longer. I thought about my marriage, full real, but not complete in the way I had believed. Eleanor had protected me from her burden until the very end. Now that the burden was in my hands, broken down into documents, data, and a letter, written with final deliberation, I turned off the light and closed the door. Outside, the house was still quiet. But in my mind, a new order was taking shape. No noise, no haste. I understood that what lay inside that safe did not belong to the marriage in the ordinary sense. It belonged to the responsibility Eleanor left behind, and I had just become the one who must continue, even though I was not ready. Tomorrow I will read in the order she requested, not to find who was wrong first, but to understand why Eleanor believed that only when I opened that safe would the story have a chance to reach its proper ending. I didn't open the letter right away. The envelope lay neatly on the desk, as if Eleanor had placed it there just before leaving the room. My name was written in her familiar handwriting, even and straight, neither shaky nor rushed. Looking at it, I had the feeling she had prepared for this moment for a very long time, long enough to strip away every unnecessary emotion. I poured myself a glass of water and drank slowly. My hands didn't shake, but my chest felt heavy. After more than 30 years of marriage, I was used to Eleanor speaking plainly when something mattered. If she chose to write a letter, it meant what was inside couldn't be spoken aloud. I sat down in her chair. The old leather creaked softly as I leaned back. There was still a dry ink stain on the left corner of the desk, a sign that she had written a great deal in that exact spot. I tore open the edge of the envelope. The paper parted smoothly, not sticking as if it had been carefully chosen to avoid making noise. The first line appeared without preamble. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are standing in front of the truth I have kept for 3 years. I stopped. 3 years. The time Eleanor fought illness, went to appointments, received treatments, still woke up early, still made coffee, still asked if I had eaten breakfast. During those 3 years, I thought I understood her better than ever. It turned out I only understood the part she allowed me to see. I kept reading. Eleanor wrote that she didn't want me to know too soon, not because she didn't trust me, but because she understood my instincts. She said I was someone who protected his family by instinct, and that very instinct could ruin everything if the truth came out before there was enough evidence. Then came the sentence that held my eyes for a long time, so long that the words after it blurred. Nathan is not the son you think he is. I read it again. Once, then again. The name of our eldest son lay on the page clear and unmistakable. Nathan, the son I was proud of, the one I had bragged about to the neighbors, the one I believed would carry the family when I grew old. I set the letter down and took a deep breath. In my mind rose the image of Nathan in a tailored suit, his steady voice, his confident eyes. I remembered the times he talked about work, about investments, about helping others manage their finances better. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Eleanor wrote that over the past 3 years, many elderly clients had come to her in genuine panic. Their savings hadn't disappeared all at once, but had been siphoned away in small, regular increments, cleverly spread out. Each withdrawal was just small enough not to alarm anyone, but added together, nothing was left. When they looked back, their accounts were empty and their memories were full of gaps. On paper, everything was clean, legitimate transactions, complete signatures, files prepared in proper order. There wasn't a single detail clear enough to be called fraud. On the surface, it looked more like unlucky financial decisions than an intentional scheme. The problem lay elsewhere. The person whose name was on the account was not the one controlling the flow of money. Eleanor documented each case the way she had done throughout 25 years of her career. No judgment, no personal commentary. Just dates, figures, signing locations, and the path the money took. People she had once helped plan their retirement now returned with fear in their eyes because the thing they believed was safest had slipped out of their hands without them knowing how. She clearly explained how the brothers' company operated. On paper, it was an independent financial advisory firm specializing in helping seniors manage assets, allocate retirement funds, and preserve value in the final stage of life. The company did not directly take high-risk investments. They only advised, coordinated, and acted under authorization. That very naming and structure kept everything permanently in a gray zone. The two brothers worked together within that system. Elliot was the legal front. The accounts were in Elliot's name. The company records listed Elliot. The bank signatures were Elliot's. On the surface, all responsibility rested on him. But Eleanor emphasized one thing very clearly. Elliot had never been the one making the final decisions. She wrote that Elliot usually appeared at the steps requiring a signature opening accounts, confirming authorizations dealing with banks or notaries. Those meetings always followed a prepared script. Nathan stood beside him, spoke for him, explained for him, guided the conversation. On paper, Elliot bore responsibility. In reality, every directive came from the older brother. I thought back to Elliot. I remembered how he sat slightly hunched when meeting clients. I remembered his slow voice, how he often paused mid-sentence to glance at Nathan. I had once thought that was weakness. I had once told Eleanor that Nathan was the one who got things done, sharp enough to handle big matters. Now every one of those judgments came back on its own, laying itself on the scale without anyone prompting it. Eleanor wrote that she had cross-checked everything carefully. She matched transaction timelines with the brothers' actual travel schedules, compared signing locations with login data devices used, and contact times. There were transactions executed while Elliot was at another bank, meeting other clients, or not even in the same city. Meanwhile, the technical traces access devices, confirmation phone numbers, coordination emails led straight back to Nathan. She also explained why no one had sued. First, the money wasn't taken all at once. It was transferred as advisory fees, management costs, or portfolio adjustments, exactly as stated in the signed contracts. Second, the clients were elderly. Many were no longer clear-headed enough to track complex statements. Some thought they remembered wrong. Others feared trouble, feared court, feared being seen by their children as duped because they were no longer lucid. And most importantly, when suspicion began, the name listed as responsible in the files was Elliot, a name that appeared rarely, spoke little, and was easily seen as someone who made mistakes out of incompetence rather than intent. Eleanor underlined one line in the final summary. The ink heavier than elsewhere, Elliot's name appears where responsibility is assigned. Nathan's fingerprints appear where decisions are made. Reading that, I understood why Eleanor chose silence for 3 years. Not because she lacked evidence, but because she knew that if the truth surfaced the wrong way, the one dragged into the light would be the weaker child, while the one pulling the strings would remain behind the scenes, clean legal, and ready to deny everything. She kept gathering statements, emails, call records, scattered fragments that, when placed side by side, formed a terrifying straight line. You need to know this, Eleanor wrote, before you defend the wrong person. I closed my eyes. In my head echoed my own voice from years before, when Elliot struggled, when his credit was denied, when his marriage fell apart. I had turned to Nathan, asked for his opinion, and trusted the neat explanations of my eldest son. The letter did not accuse. Eleanor did not use the word crime, did not name the act. She only spoke of responsibility and consequence. She wrote that if the truth was exposed the wrong way, Elliot would be the first pulled into the light, and Nathan, with his perfect exterior, would stand behind him, untouched. The final line on the page dried my throat. I don't know if I have enough time left to make this right. If I don't, you must do it for me. I folded the letter and rested my hand on the desk. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. The outside world went on Carslight's other families while mine had just been turned to a different side. I didn't feel anger right away. I didn't feel pain the way I had imagined. What I felt most clearly was the collapse of a familiar order. The person I trusted most might not be innocent. The one I had underestimated might be carrying something he did not cause. I looked at the USB drive and the red mark file. The letter was only the door. Those things were the room behind it. I stood up and slid the chair back into the exact position Eleanor used to leave it. Before turning off the light, I read the first sentence of the letter once more. This time I understood why she called it a truth she had hidden for 3 years. Not because it was complicated, but because it was powerful enough to tear a family apart if it fell into unready hands. I wasn't sure whether I was ready. But I knew one thing from this moment on: I no longer had the right to choose not to know. The names, the numbers, the red marks were waiting for me to keep reading. And when I opened the first file, I understood that the letter truly was not meant for the faint-hearted, because it didn't just reveal a secret. It forced the reader to decide where he stood when the truth began tearing at his own flesh and blood. I opened the first red-stamped file when the clock hand was nearly touching midnight. The house was so quiet that every page turned sounded loud. I sat in the exact chair Eleanor used to sit in, moving the laptop slightly aside so the light wouldn't glare. The way she organized the files was still intact, as if all I had to do was follow her order to see what she had seen. 3 years. Eleanor had tracked every detail for that long. The first page was a comparison chart. Dates, accounts, recipient entities. The amounts were not large, but the repetition was terrifyingly steady. The transactions followed a fixed cycle lining up perfectly with the time slots, when Elliot was always supposed to be elsewhere. I turned the page. Internal emails bearing Elliot's signature, yet the tone was sharp and decisive. The exact writing style I knew all too well from Nathan. The next file was the company registration. A neutral name, a shared office address. Legal representative, Elliot. Primary contact, Nathan's phone number. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. The image of Nathan standing in the kitchen talking about optimizing cash flow surfaced vividly. I had believed him because I wanted to believe him. Eleanor had not. She wrote a margin note. Check access sources. The next page was a technical report. Every login to the accounts under Elliot's name originated from devices Nathan used. Time, location data, everything matched. She underlined the conclusion, adding no commentary. I felt my body grow unbearably heavy. I had thought I understood my children. I chose to believe the one who spoke smoothly, the one who appeared more confident. I dismissed the other's silence as weakness. The second file left nowhere to hide. The statements showed consulting fees withdrawn, regularly flowing through a shell company, and then back into intermediary accounts. At the end of the chain were small, repeated amounts, discreet enough not to alarm anyone long enough to drain the savings of the elderly. Eleanor marked each intersection point red lines, connecting into a single cold, straight path. Then I reached the part that made my hand drop the file onto the table. Elliot's credit report. Loans in his name, signed on days he was not present. Guarantees he did not remember agreeing to. The debt ballooned rapidly, pushing him to the brink of bankruptcy. Eleanor wrote briefly, financial pressure equals enforced silence. That was when I understood. Nathan did not just take money. He used his younger brother's identity to build the system, then shoved all the risk onto Elliot. When it collapsed, the name on the papers would be summoned first. The one whose signature was there would be detained. Nathan, with the role of advisor, would step in as an outsider, regretful at precisely the right moment. Old memories returned, family dinners, Elliot asking me to sign something to meet the deadline, Nathan standing beside him, reassuring me it was just a formality. I signed. I did not ask more. I placed my trust in the wrong place. I reopened Eleanor's letter and reread the underlined sentence. If this breaks the wrong way, Elliot will be arrested first, not might. Will? I stood up and leaned against the hallway wall. On the family photo shelf, Nathan smiled confidently. Elliot stood slightly off to the side, hands in his pockets. The smile I once felt proud of now turned razor sharp in my memory. I plugged the USB into the laptop just after the clock passed 2 in the morning. The glow from the screen spilled across the desk, bright enough to reveal every speck of fine dust. I knew I was doing something irreversible. Once this was opened, every door behind me would quietly close. The USB was organized neatly, exactly the way Eleanor always worked. 2 folders appeared, first clients and audio. No decoration, no password. That bluntness sent a chill through me. Eleanor didn't hide things behind locks. She hid them behind order, something only the patient could ever fully trace. I opened clients. A list of names appeared in alphabetical order. I picked one at random. The first file opened to a short information sheet. Age, family situation, source of retirement funds. The date the consulting began. The next line was the amount, lost, rounded, understated. I looked to the column on the right, the path of the money. Arrows ran from a personal account to an intermediary company, then split looping through 2 other legal entities before flowing into a familiar account. The company name was harmless. Contact person, Nathan. I closed that file and opened the next, then another. Every profile was structurally identical, differing only in the faces behind the numbers. A widower living alone, an elderly couple sending money to cover medical bills, someone who had sold their house planning to divide it among their children and grandchildren. The money moved in a steady rhythm, siphoned, thinly stretched over time. By the time they realized what was happening, the accounts held amounts just enough to keep them from starving, but never enough to live with dignity. I scrolled to the bottom of the folder. A summary sheet appeared. Eleanor had totaled everything. The final figure stopped at $2.3 million, just a result placed neatly where it belonged. I leaned back in the chair. What sat in my chest was no longer shock. It felt like being forced to stare directly at a massive crack, clear cold, leaving no room for excuses. I had gone too far to turn back. I opened audio. A list of files appeared, dated each short in length. I put on my headphones. The first file opened with the rustle of paper. Then Nathan's voice came through, calm, confident, familiar. He was talking about arrangements to make clients feel secure about getting signatures early to stay on schedule. Smooth instructions like training a new employee. I switched files. Nathan's voice dropped, lower slowed, explaining how to respond when asked about fees. Don't explain too much. Say exactly what's written in the contract. In another file, he gave a soft laugh when mentioning the elderly's perception lag. I muted the sound for a few seconds, took the headphones off, and set them on the desk. I needed air. I stood up and opened the window. Night wind poured in cool, but offering no relief. Down in the yard, tree shadows swayed gently. The world was still running normally while I stood trapped inside a choice no one ever wants. I went back to the desk and kept listening. Another recording carried Elliot's voice. He sounded hesitant, asking questions, seeking clarification. Nathan cut in, reassuring, guiding him. Just follow it. I'll handle the rest. The voice wasn't harsh, wasn't forceful. That gentleness was what made it terrifying. It turned wrongdoing into routine. I reopened the client's folder and selected a file marked with a gray note. Eleanor had added a line, follow-up contact made. I opened the attachment. It was an email reply from the client, short, polite, asking for clarification. Below it sat a draft response, unsent. The wording sounded like Nathan, calm enough to soothe, vague enough to buy time. Eleanor never sent it. She kept it. I looked at the clock, nearly 3 a.m. I understood why Eleanor chose a USB instead of paper. Audio data timestamps, everything placed side by side formed a picture that couldn't be denied. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof. I opened that file after going through every other folder. The file name was short, no notes. Just a single date and timestamp matching the period when Eleanor began to change noticeably. I pressed play. It was a phone call. Eleanor's voice came first. Not the voice of a professional consultant. Not the everyday voice of a wife. It was the voice of a mother trying to hold herself together one last time. Nathan, she said his name. Not raised, but enough for me to know she was standing, not sitting. I want to ask you one question. Why did you do this to your brother? There was a brief silence. Then Nathan's voice appeared, familiar enough to make my blood run cold, calm, steady, just like every time he spoke to me. What are you talking about? Mom, Eleanor, didn't circle around it. She went straight in. Client money, the accounts. Everything is in Elliot's name. You're the one controlling it. I've already checked. This time Nathan didn't deny it right away. He let out a breath, as if weighing how to explain it as efficiently as possible. So what? On paper, it's Elliot's name. If something happens, they go to him first. I felt my throat tighten. Eleanor continued. Her voice began to tremble, but she kept her rhythm. Have you thought about the consequences? If this comes out, Elliot will be the one going to prison first, Nathan replied almost immediately. No hesitation. No pause. Well, yeah, he signed it. A beat of silence. Then Eleanor spoke very softly, as if asking herself, Are you using your brother as a shield? Nathan let out a small laugh, short, not joyful, not loudly cruel. Just the confidence of someone who believes he's standing in the right place. Think about it, Mom. Who's going to believe Elliot? He stutters when he talks science papers without thinking. They'll think he's greedy or stupid. I'm just the consultant. Eleanor choked. I could clearly hear her inhale, then lose the breath at the end of her sentence. He's your brother. Nathan replied, his voice dropping as if giving advice. Because he's my brother, I let him hold the name. You understand, now. Someone has to carry the dirty part. Eleanor started crying, not loudly, just broken breaths slipping out restrained, but impossible to hold back. She asked her last question, almost pleading. What if Elliot actually gets arrested? Nathan answered quickly, cleanly, decisively, like closing a deal. Then he's unlucky. That's business, Mom. Risk. The call ended there. No apology. No further explanation. Just the dry click of a disconnected line. I sat motionless in front of the screen. No need to rewind. Every sentence was still there in my head, painfully clear. Those weren't words spoken in anger, not a slip of the tongue. That was a fully organized way of thinking. In that call, Elliot wasn't a brother, just a convenient position. I understood why Eleanor recorded it, not to keep evidence for court, but to preserve the moment she realized which side the child she raised had chosen when a price had to be paid. I closed the laptop. This time my hands didn't shake. There was no explosive rage, just one very clear feeling I had just heard my son's real voice, without any layers. From that moment on, I knew there was no way back, because when someone can calmly push his own brother into prison so he can stand outside every question afterward, becomes a formality. Eleanor cried in that recording. As for me, I began preparing, because the one who said who would believe him anyway would soon have to answer to people who no longer had any reason to believe. I had heard enough. The collapse wasn't loud. It was simply the moment I realized the image I had built for years had shattered each piece, falling into places where they could never be gathered again. I sat down, kept my breathing steady. If I let emotion lead, I would ruin everything. After that, I sent Elliot a few casual messages, not mentioning money. He replied quickly with his usual timid wording. I sent another message, Come by the house tomorrow. After a long pause, he replied, Yes. I did not contact Nathan. I reorganized the files in the order Eleanor had marked, locked the drawer. I looked around the room, the place where she had worked for 25 years helping others protect their futures. The final lesson she left me was very clear. The truth has to be revealed the right way, or it will kill the wrong person. As dawn approached, I knew my next step. I had to prepare the stage, just as Eleanor had, and this time I would not let instinct ruin the plan. The next morning, Elliot arrived at my house earlier than scheduled. He stood on the porch, holding his hat, his thin frame clearly visible. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled out the chair across from me and told him directly what needed to be done. Elliot nodded immediately when I mentioned the credit report. He unlocked his phone, confirmed access, and handled everything swiftly, like someone far too familiar with being audited. The numbers on the screen made the room feel colder. His credit score plunged across the timeline. Loans appeared in clusters stacking on top of one another. Credit limits were stretched thin, penalties followed in sequence, and guarantees surfaced. At moments Elliot remembered all too well, while he was running errands for clients, while taking Mila to medical appointments, while scrambling to keep the house after the marriage began to fracture. I traced each line. Every scroll downward reshaped an old memory. The divorce hadn't started with marital conflict, but with sudden financial pressure. The house wasn't sold in haste due to poor management, but because an unexpected debt was called in all at once. Mila's surgery wasn't postponed due to negligence, but because the bank rejected a loan application within 10 minutes. Every instance aligned perfectly with the moments Nathan had stepped in to help. I asked Elliot one question, just one. Do you remember what you signed? He was silent, then shook his head. Not the shake of denial, but the shake of someone realizing his memory had been used as a tool. Elliot said that every time he signed, Nathan always claimed he had checked everything thoroughly, that it was just procedure, that all risks had already been calculated. Elliot believed him because he was his brother, because he thought he himself was worse at handling numbers. I closed the report. In my mind, the failures once labeled as incompetence suddenly lined up in a straight row, not random, not disconnected. Someone had placed them deliberately. That afternoon, I met someone from Eleanor's old client list. She was in her 70s, her voice tired but clear. When I mentioned Elliot, she looked at me for a long time before speaking slowly. That boy helped me for free. He fixed my paperwork, called the bank for me, and told me not to sign anything I didn't understand. He said he was only doing his part. She paused, took a breath. The one who talked a lot made fast decisions and always stood in front. That wasn't him. I left as dusk approached. In my mind, the picture was complete. Elliot didn't fail because he was weak. He slid downward because he had been positioned to take the blows. Every fall he took carried the trace of the hand I had trusted most. When I returned home, Elliot was sitting by the window, looking out into the backyard. I didn't comfort him. I didn't make promises. I said only one sentence enough for him to understand he was no longer standing alone. What you've been carrying all this time was never yours. Elliot didn't cry. He nodded very slightly, and I understood that from this point on, my memories had shifted direction, and when memory shifts direction, truth finally has somewhere to stand. I sent a message to the family group at 4 p.m, just one short line about Mom. Tonight at 7. Everyone present. No explanation, no exclamation points. I knew Nathan would understand it was a summons, not an invitation. Elliot read it and replied immediately, "I'll be there." Nathan's message came later with a nod emoji, the kind used by someone who believes he still has the upper hand. 10 minutes before 7, Nathan showed up at the gate. The familiar suit, the practiced smile, the confident stride of a man walking into a meeting he expects to win. He greeted me, flicked a quick glance at Elliot, then bent down to ruffle Mila's hair, a perfectly rehearsed gesture. I left the door open and said little. The living room was lit just enough. The low table was cleared, the chairs arranged in a circle. I placed my phone on the table screen, facing the ceiling, positioned so everyone could see it. "You called us in so urgently." "Dad, what's going on?" Nathan asked, his tone light, carefully controlled. "Sit down first," I said. "Someone else is coming." Nathan shrugged and pulled out a chair. Elliot sat opposite his brother, hands clasped together. Mila sat close beside her father, legs swinging, eyes roaming the room. I waited exactly 2 minutes. The doorbell rang. Agent Hanlon stepped inside, coat neatly hung, briefcase in hand. The day before, I had called the number Eleanor had written in her notebook, the State Financial Investigations Unit. Nathan froze for half a beat, then put on a polite smile. "Good evening," Hanlon said. Sorry I'm late. You're right on time, I replied. Let's begin. I tapped the screen. The recording started a faint crackle before the sound sharpened. Eleanor's voice filled the room, tired but firm. She asked directly, Nathan explained this to me. Why did you use your brother's name? The room went silent. Nathan stared at the phone, then at me. His expression shifted quickly from surprise to irritation. On the recording, Nathan's voice was blunt. Elliot's name is on the paperwork. He signed it. He takes the fall. I saw Elliot's hands tighten. Mila looked up, not understanding, just watching her father. Eleanor continued on the tape, her voice breaking. If this comes out, Elliot will be called in first. Do you know what will happen to your brother? There was a pause. Then Nathan answered chillingly, casual. Who would believe him? He doesn't matter. I stopped the recording. No one spoke right away. Nathan cleared his throat and forced a laugh. Why are you playing this? Dad, Mom was sick back then. She wasn't thinking straight. That was your voice, I cut in. Say it again now. Nathan turned to me, his voice dropping into the familiar tone of condescension. Don't overreact. What you just heard was just paperwork management. If I hadn't handled things, Elliot would have collapsed a long time ago. Then he glanced at Elliot, half smirk, half contempt. He can't handle anything on his own. Elliot looked up. For the first time, he met his brother's eyes. You told me to sign for Mila. You said everything was safe. Nathan shrugged. No one forced you to believe me. I looked at Agent Hanlon. He gave a slight nod. I pressed the button again. Another recording played, this time Nathan's voice giving instructions over the phone. Have Elliot sign first. Keeps it clean. I'll handle the coordination. Nathan shot to his feet. Are you setting me up? You set yourself up, I said. In front of your brother. In front of my granddaughter. Mila tugged on Elliot's sleeve and whispered. Daddy Elliot bent down and pulled her close. The gesture irritated Nathan. He turned on me sharply. Do you think you're doing the right thing? You're tearing this family apart. Tonight, I said slowly, we're only talking about the truth. Nathan sneered and looked at Hanlon. Who are you to listen in on my family's business? I said, this is Agent Hanlon. He works with the Financial Investigations Unit. Hanlon opened his briefcase and placed a stack of documents on the table. I'm here because what you just said aligns with the data we already have, and because you've just confirmed your directing role. Nathan went rigid. In that moment, the mask finally fell. He pointed at Elliot. If he hadn't put his name on it, those old investors would have sued years ago. I just streamlined things. The words spilled out too fast. No one stopped him. The room felt frozen. Elliot stared at his brother, lips pressed tight. Mila looked confused, but she knew something was very wrong. Hanlon wrote notes. Thank you for clarifying. Nathan turned back to me, his voice low-edged with threat. You think you've won tonight? I said I only made sure the right person stood in the light. I stood, took a red-stamped file from the drawer, and placed it in front of Hanlon. Everything's in there, in order, just as Eleanor prepared it. Nathan stepped back half a pace. His earlier confidence dissolved, replaced by the panic of a man cornered. Elliot remained seated, but his back was straighter now. Mila rested her head on her father's shoulder. Hanlon closed his briefcase. We'll be in touch. When the door shut, Nathan stood alone in the middle of the living room. No one left to hear his explanations. No one who needed them anymore. I looked straight at my eldest son. You can go. Nathan opened his mouth, then stopped. He turned and walked out quickly. The door closed behind him, leaving a very clear emptiness. I sat down beside Elliot. Take Mila to her room. I'll stay here. Elliot nodded. When the room was empty again, I looked at the phone on the table. The recording had ended, but its effect hadn't. Tonight the truth had been spoken to the right people at the right time. And from here on, no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. The family meeting ended without anyone saying goodbye. Nathan left, first his face set tight. Elliot carried Mila upstairs, moving slowly. I stayed in the living room a few more minutes, put my phone away, turned off the lights, then locked the door. Everything that needed to be said had been said. What remained no longer belonged to words. The next morning I brought the entire file set in according to schedule. Not a large headquarters, just a secure conference room, a long table, white overhead lights. Agent Hanlon was already seated. I set the briefcase down, unlocked it, and took out each folder in the exact order Eleanor had marked. Statements, emails, audio recordings, device cross-checks, everything lay still on the table as if waiting to be called by name. Hanlon skimmed through, nodded. No further questions. He called someone in, signed the receipt, sealed the materials. I signed at the bottom of the report, my handwriting steady. When I closed the briefcase, I felt lighter, in a very strange way, like setting down a weight I had carried for far too long. That afternoon, Elliot called. His voice was low. They're asking me questions. I told him to tell the truth, only the truth, and to bring Mila to my place tonight. He paused for a beat, then said, "Yes." The police moved in quietly. No sirens in front of my house. No crowds gathering. They worked where work needed to be done, asked the people who needed to be asked. Money flows were cut off. Accounts were frozen. Shell companies shut down like lights going out, room by room. Nathan was summoned shortly after. 2 days later, they executed the arrest warrant. I wasn't there. I knew through a brief call from Hanlon. "We've completed the first part." I said thank you. The call ended. News spread slowly, but surely. Part of the money was returned to the affected families. Not enough for everyone, but enough to say this had hit where it mattered. Elliot was called in, explained, then left as a witness. His name began to be put back where it belonged, no longer a shield. That evening, Mila went to bed early. Elliot sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I thought everything was going to collapse on me," he said. I shook my head. Everything collapsed in the right place. We didn't talk about Nathan. We talked about tomorrow. Mila's school scheduled doctor appointments, what Elliot needed to do to stand on his feet again. Small things, but necessary ones. When night fell, I opened Eleanor's notebook. On the last page, she had written simply, "When the truth is delivered to the right place, it finds the right people on its own." I closed the book. The aftershocks were still there, but the direction was clear, and this time I knew my hands were on the right wheel. I sold the old house at the beginning of fall. The decision came faster than I expected. Not because I urgently needed the money, but because that house held too much of a time that would never return. On the day I signed the papers, I lingered in the back office, the place where Eleanor had sat for 25 years. The desk, the chair, the light, everything was still exactly where it belonged, except for her. I didn't take much with me. A thin notebook, a brass paperclip, and a photograph of her smiling softly taken before she got sick. The rest I left to memory. The money from selling the house was divided into 2 parts. One part was used to close out unfinished obligations taxes, paperwork, the items Eleanor had carefully noted. The remaining part I gave to Elliot, not as a gift, but as a way to restore order. "You need to use this properly," I told him. "Return what you can return. Clear your name first." Elliot didn't argue. He took the money, made a list, and called each person. Some debts were repaid immediately. Some required appointments. Some people only needed a clear explanation. Elliot handled each task slowly but steadily. I stood behind him, only making sure my son was no longer being dragged back into the role of carrying other people's burdens. Nathan was different. After many hearings and several months of additional investigation, the trial came to an end. I don't dwell on the proceedings. What remains in my memory is only the moment the judge spoke calm to the point of chilling and delivered the sentence of 12 years in prison. That number echoed through the room, then settled final and unmovable. Nathan stood still. His eyes avoided contact, his head slightly lowered. He didn't look for me. He didn't turn toward Elliot either. The confidence that once allowed him to control everything disappeared, revealing a man completely exposed before a decision already sealed. My family walked out of the courtroom in a different order than before. Elliot walked beside me. Mila held her father's hand and asked softly, "Are we going home now?" Dad, Elliot, nodded. That was all. The new house was smaller, brighter. I set aside a quiet corner on the ground floor and recreated Eleanor's office in a simple way: a wooden desk, a desk lamp, a low file shelf. No sign, no slogan. On the wall hung a framed sheet of paper, her old work schedule yellowed at the edges. Every time I stepped inside, I felt order restored without a word being spoken. Elliot came by often. He brought coffee, asked me about small decisions. His shoulders no longer slumped when he spoke. Not fully confident yet, but standing where he belonged. Mila spread her colored pencils across the floor, drawing houses with bright windows. One afternoon, Mila brought me a short piece of writing. She read slowly, stumbling over a few words. It was about her grandmother, about the woman who helped others stay safe in the final years of their lives. When she finished, Mila asked, Did Grandma leave a lot of money?" I answered. "She left something that lasts longer." The child nodded as if understanding in her own way. That night, I opened the notebook Eleanor had left behind. No long instructions, just names, tasks, unfinished matters. And I understood she had never thought of money as something to leave behind. She thought about how to leave things behind, how to tell the truth, how to wait for the right moment, how to place the truth into the hands of someone strong enough to carry it. My family is not perfect now. An empty chair still shows itself at the dinner table, but pretense is gone. We speak less but more accurately. When silence is needed, we are silent. When decisions are needed, we decide. I locked the office door, turned off the light, and stepped into the backyard. The tree Eleanor planted years ago had grown taller. I understood the final thing more clearly than ever. Eleanor did not leave money behind. She left the truth. And that much is enough for this family to keep living, not perfectly, just without lies. There are families that fall apart not because of poverty, but because the truth is hidden for too long. I lost my wife, almost lost my son, and nearly allowed my granddaughter to grow up inside a distorted story. What remains after everything is not money or a sentence, but order. Restored those who bear responsibility, stand in the right place, and those who are innocent are called by their proper names. If this story touched you, leave a period, and let us know where you are listening from. Subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories. Thank you for staying until the final moment.